Hey everyone, Richard here, and this is WipEout Omega Collection show and running here on PlayStation 4 Pro. Now, back in the day, we loved this game for its amazing native 4K 60Hz presentation. Not to mention its beautiful reworking, not just of WipEout HD and its Fury offshoot, but also a full-on remastering of the excellent WipEout 2048. So, you've got maximum resolution and a super tight lock to 60 frames per second. Where do you go from there? Well, how about PlayStation VR support? Yes, with a free patch available now for all Omega Collection owners, WipEout is now fully VR enabled, and I decided to take a look at the game running on PS4 Pro, and first impressions? Well, they're pretty amazing actually. On first glance, everything kinda looks just like you remember it from the flatter, more 2D original, except that now you're transplanted into a virtual world. Now you're on that futuristic racetrack, and there are some truly great VR moments here. On the starting grid, for instance, default viewpoint is inside the cockpit, so in those pre-race moments, why not take a look around the dashboard and look at the controls? And what about the environment itself? You're inside this huge, beautifully rendered cityscape. The sense of scale is just remarkable. And then, well, the canopy of the craft shifts into race position, and you're given a kinda TIE fighter style look to the cabin. After the expanse of the pre-race view, now everything kind of feels a lot more claustrophobic, and as we take on this massive vertical curve, you actually find yourself ducking down to get a better look of the track ahead, and yes, it really does work. It's all by design. The developers aren't just porting over the Omega Collection experience as is to PSVR. They're actually looking to do something more to give a bit of extra value to maximize what virtual reality can offer. But yeah, that in-cockpit view, it can be a little intense. Intense being a word you're likely to hear a lot in this video. Now you can move out to the standard third-person chase cam views, and here the developers use the enlarged field of view to push the HUD out. A nice idea in theory, but in some cases you have to look away from the action to get the on-screen display information that you need. And well, in a game as fast as this, bad things can happen. Now before we go on, something I do want to say is that it's actually really hard to effectively capture the output of PlayStation VR, and primarily we are going to be using the social screen feed, the bonus HDMI output from the PSVR processor box, designed to show onlookers what you're doing in the virtual world. However, that is a pretty small area of the overall scene being rendered, so things look somewhat blurry. It's not fully representative of the actual experience, which on the Pro renders natively at 1620p before being super sampled down to the visor's 1080p display for improved anti-aliasing. Now that means that I can't really show you representative image quality then, but what I can tell you is that jaggies only really appear on the in-game menus. Gameplay itself has some shimmer on harsh geometric edges, but fundamentally you're looking at a 150% resolution scale here, and the image quality holds up. The developers tell me that the base PlayStation 4 also benefits from a 140% scale, taking the resolution there up to 1512p. And that kind of makes me wonder what other tweaks might be in place to make that possible on the base system. After all, WipEout Omega Edition originally ran at 1080p there. I can also confirm that the hardware EQAA used on the original game is also present in the VR version. So, as things stand though, WipEout VR on Pro at least is pretty much, dare I say it, the full fat experience. You look at something like Drive Club here, pretty awesome game in VR actually, and it renders at 60 frames per second versus the standard game's 30. But yeah, you pay the price in terms of a massive reduction in visual quality, lighting, detail, post-processing, you name it. We're stripped back to the bones here. But the VR experience, it works and it's great. You make the trade and it's fine, but you kinda want more. The question is to what extent WipEout can deliver on that. Okay, so let's cut to the comparisons here. Pro versus Pro VR. And of course it's the social screen feed, so don't go in expecting to see full resolution on the right hand side there. And yeah, Pro on the left is a 1080p capture, super sampled down from 4K, so massive image quality advantage there. Short of blurring playing it though, not much I can do about that to make things more comparable, but still, here we are. First of all, on the original WipEout HD tracks specifically, well, things look a little dimmer on the VR side, but fundamentally we are feature complete here. Geometry on the tracks looks pretty much identical, overall effects work is by and large the same, and the only omission is motion blur, which you really wouldn't and shouldn't see implemented on a VR game. But you look at this scene and you'll note the lack of bloom on the PlayStation VR side. Now, it's not that PSVR doesn't have bloom, but there's certainly been some changes to lighting, and it's especially noticeable on the WipEout 2048 tracks. I mean, check this out and you'll see how stark it can be. Thing is, we've puzzled over this one quite a bit, and although right here it looks like a lighting downgrade, it's perhaps more likely to be a colour grading adjustment designed specifically for VR play and the hardware's OLED screen in particular. And it is bloom that is being dialed back for the most part here to the point where, yeah, maybe you think it has been removed completely. But it hasn't, as you can see here. I think the bottom line is that certainly in the headset itself, you do feel like you're getting the complete WipEout experience. All the graphical frills of the standard game, with the bonus awesomeness that VR provides. But what about performance? Well, things get pretty intense in VR. Yes, there's that word again, but the original game was known for its rock-solid frame rate, and the VR version follows suit. Okay, so what you're seeing here is something a little different. It's the actual 120Hz 1080p feed from the PlayStation 4 Pro itself, slowed down to 50% to match the 60 frames per second format of this video. So, first of all, you can see why super sampling is so important for good anti-aliasing, because although the PSVR visor has a 1080p screen, the actual Full HD output of the console itself, well, you can see that there's a lot of black space, right? What's happening here is that the output is warped to match the lenses of the headset, which stretches everything out to provide that massive, all-encompassing VR field of view. Right, so with that established, let's talk 120Hz. In common with a lot of PSVR games, the game actually renders at 60 frames per second, then uses interpolation to hit 120Hz. But you might have noticed ghosting on these games when in the headset, and with this capture I can show you why. Okay, so that you can see that forward momentum in WipEout, actual in-game motion, seems to be happening every other frame. However, on the frames where the craft isn't moving into the screen, you do still see minor adjustments to the rendering. What's happening here is that every frame, all 120 of them per second, are adjusted according to the motion of the PSVR headset itself, and that is running at a different rate to the actual game renderer. It aims to provide smoother response and lower latency, and in this respect it kinda works. And in fact, when you're static and looking around, the interpolation looks really rather impressive overall. However, the steps in forward motion during gameplay are indeed every other frame, and that means that really and truly, WipEout VR is still a 60 frames per second game. But you know, as we have that 120Hz feed, we can actually perform frame rate testing on the clips, which I think may be a first for PSVR. I actually measured both the kinds of frames being rendered here, and I couldn't see any drops at all. Solid frame rate is essential for a good VR experience, and while I can't rule out slowdown completely, everything I've played so far looks really solid. So I'm going to round this off by talking about motion sickness. Yes, this really is an intense game, and yes, you're going to need your VR legs to play this for extended periods of time. In fact, it's really quite challenging simply because there's a lot of motion in the game world that isn't happening in the real world, leading to a nauseous feeling that some will feel sooner than others. From my perspective, I think you're going to need your VR battle pants in addition to your VR legs here, because the action really is insane at times. Now, at various points during the game, it does warn you that some tracks can cause motion sickness, and in this case you're given a warning plus automatic pilot assists are enabled. There's also a warning in the Fury Eliminator mode, where you use the 180-degree flip to battle opponents behind you. There's the sense that the game is trying to protect you from the extremes, but man, practically any hardcore combat can start to make you feel a little queasy. This is a zero compromise VR experience. Yeah, zero compromise. I think that's the best way to describe this free upgrade to the Omega Collection. You see, we've seen plenty of VR ports that have stripped back the game to make virtual reality work, or we've seen bonus modes, samplers if you like, bolted onto AAA titles, but it's rare that we see a zero compromise approach to bringing VR to an existing, really challenging game. I mean, the performance holds up here, the gameplay is the same, you can even run multiplayer in VR alongside other users playing on standard displays. Where nips and tucks seemingly have been made, it's mostly been about removing stuff like motion blur that wouldn't work in VR anyway. So yeah, if your stomach can take it and you own a PSVR headset, this really is essential, and if your stomach can't take it, well, just try a couple of races at a time and give yourself a break, and I suspect that you'll make it through and still have a great time with this. Omega Collection was always highly recommended for PS4 and Pro users, and now it gets a big thumbs up for PSVR 2. And that's where I'm going to leave things for now while I can still speak. Yeah, as you can tell, I'm not 100% well at the moment, but I'm sure things will pick up in the next couple of days. But anyway, as always, do like and subscribe for this kind of deep dive analysis, and yes, please consider supporting the DF Patreon to help us do more and do better. But that's all from me for now. Thanks for watching.